Face to Face with Charlene Benedict.
Hello there, very good evening, and welcome back to another episode of Face to Face. We're joined today by Dr. George Cooke, diplomatic historian. Very good evening, Dr. George, and welcome to the program.
Thank you so much.
So, Dr. Cooke, you're here today to discuss, of course, on the latest that's taking place in the Middle East, and this is a pertinent topic because we just passed the 2-year anniversary since the October 7th attack that really escalated the situation in the Middle East. And I remember for the longest time when we were studying about, the history of the genocide of the Jews, we always used to wonder what the world was like for, Adolf Hitler to murder 6 million Jews and the entire world just standing by. And today, we can see similar scenes happening. The leading experts in genocide have confirmed that there is a genocide going on in Gaza. There is also Middle Eastern countries striking on Israel. There's a lot of tension in the Middle East. It's always been a very tense region in the world, but with the advent of Donald Trump and his policies with regard to the Middle East, it seems to have escalated, although he came in on promises of suppressing the tension. So to start things off, the escalation of the tensions in the Middle East since October 7th. So since October 7th, what has the pattern been like? Is it a little bit better now in terms of how much Israel is striking Gaza and the tensions in the Middle East per se, as compared to the 7th of October and the immediate aftermath of that?
Going back to that point that you made at the beginning there, Charlene, you said Second World War, we saw what happened. And how come we're having a repetition today and people are dying on a daily basis? I mean, attacks are taking place, people are dying of starvation, there are lots of issues happening there. And why isn't anything being done? And this is where we go back to power. Imagine Second World War and imagine an alternate history. Imagine things had gone the other way and Hitler had won. We wouldn't know about the concentration camps.
We wouldn't know about
We wouldn't know about them. We wouldn't know about the atrocities committed within Germany. We would know of what was happening on the other side, which has not come out. Starvation in India, well, it's come out to some extent, but not extensively. So it depends on power. At that point, we know where the power was. And the victorious powers were able to bring out this information later on. Of course, at the height of the war, Hitler got away with what he was doing. But later on, we got to know about it. We started talking about it. We learnt it. Today, that's the same thing. If you're strong and powerful, you can get away with anything.
But as far as access to information goes, there doesn't seem to be a real dearth of information. I mean, I'm pretty sure the things that are happening in the region are much more horrific than what we are seeing. But what we are seeing is quite horrific.
There's a restriction. So they're not allowing things. Journalists talk about how when they are flying into those areas, they're asked not to video. They cannot video anything out of their planes. There are several restrictions that have been placed on them and they have to follow through. Otherwise, they're going to face consequences of not being able to report anything at all. So this is where the situation is really grave in that part of the world. Going back 2 years ago and where we are today, Israel as a country is being perceived to be very strong on the world stage because of what has happened, not only with regard to Palestine and Gaza and that region, with regard to Lebanon, with regard to Iran. We've seen attacks. We saw them carrying out an attack less than a month ago in Qatar. Now you're going into a sovereign country and you're carrying out an attack and coming out. And
Qatar was not just a sovereign country, they were a mediator in the conflict.
Exactly. So what does that say? That's power. But within the country, is that leader enjoying that same power? Look at what is happening today. There are 2 separate commemorations being held for October 7th. One by the government, another by the people. Because the people do not have faith. They are very worried. They're very concerned. There are still more hostages within that territory. They want them freed. They are not satisfied with the progress being made. They are out there. They're protesting. They are remembering those who have lost their lives, but also realizing how much change has taken place. If we go back to October 2023, the Prime Minister was very unpopular in the country. He has not been able to hold elections, obviously because of the situation. And he has got 2 more years in power. He has managed to lengthen his duration of leadership in that country. But is that what the people want? That's another question. So in time to come, how will this be on the 7th of October 2026? We're hoping there'll be a complete resolution to this issue. Many countries are getting involved. The United States is involved. Egypt is a location right now. They're having discussions. They're having mediations. We hope there will be a resolution. We hope that there will be an acceptance, but there are certain stumbling blocks that have to be overcome. How they are going to do that will be the skill of the negotiators, and what countries are willing to, and what Hamas is willing to give up, accept. There has got to be compromise on both sides. And how that will happen is another question.
So speaking about resolving the conflict, at least to bring some sort of normalcy, a ceasefire at the very least, this Trump's 20-point plan, I was watching some reports coming out of Gaza, some people being interviewed, and many of them, despite the controversial nature of the 20-point plan as to how the power imbalance and of course, compromises on both sides have been set out in the 20-point plan, people seem to be hopeful, at least, regarding some sort of reprieve, even if it comes through the 20-point plan of Donald Trump. However, there is no, although Hamas put out a statement saying that they are willing to discuss on this matter, there is still no solid confirmation, solid compromises from either side. And on the eve of the second anniversary of the October 7th attacks, there were further attacks in Gaza by Israel. Certain Gazan militant groups had also fired rockets towards Israel. So where do you see this 20-point plan going?
Today, yesterday, today, these few days in Egypt are extremely crucial. How they will be able to address, they're not sitting down face to face. There are mediators who are getting involved at this stage. There were reports that attack that took place in Doha earlier on in September, apparently one of the negotiators' son also was killed in the process. So when you have people coming to the table with that kind of memory very fresh, it's hard. It's hard, but they're still trying to do that because something is better than nothing. And the attacks are going on. That it's rubble. It's not like you can go and put people back and resettle them. You have to do town planning all over again. There's rubble everywhere. There's nothing that is stable now from reports that we're seeing, visuals that we're seeing. There's total destruction in that region. And if anything comes out of this, the most important thing, you said at the very least, is a ceasefire. For those people to have at least a few days of respite, to be able to get medicine in there, food in there, water in there, which they are being denied. There are severe restrictions on it. And when that happens, the United Nations is helpless, UN organizations are helpless. They cannot enter these areas. Of course, the United Nations Secretary General, the Israeli Prime Minister, not exactly on the same wavelength. There have been a ban on him coming to Israel, etc. But still, the United Nations is operating. They're trying, organizations are on the ground, they're trying to help people. Other aid agencies are on the ground trying to help people. But when you're in the midst of bombings, agencies are not going to move into those areas. Their staff are under risk.
Their staff have been killed already.
They've been killed. So they're going to think twice. Their staff are going to want their organizations to protect them. And they're putting their neck out there not to get killed. They want to help people. Their objective is to help people. So one important thing that should come out of the plan is an immediate ceasefire. But it must be respected by both sides. This is the problem. Enforcing it becomes extremely difficult. You've also got to remember from Hamas' point of view, so Hamas negotiators, Hamas on the ground. There's got to be collaboration there. You've got to make sure that that is happening. Because the ones on the ground have the hostages. The ones meeting in Egypt don't. Hopefully there's really good coordination happening within that organization.
And maybe even the negotiators hadn't set foot in Gaza for quite a long time.
Exactly. So they're in one scenario, they're trying to work things out, but there are people on the ground who are facing a different situation. So we are not aware of what exactly is going on within that structure. That is another factor for us to consider. But at least if they can have a ceasefire that will hold for some time, those people have been suffering so much now. There was an Israeli resident who said recently, killing their babies won't bring our babies back. You know, the killing has to stop. It's tit for tat. How much are we going to keep doing this? At some point, someone's got to be the bigger person and say, okay, we're stopping this. Who's going to do that? That's the question here.
speaking of support for Israel in the war and the narrative of Western countries, they seem to have taken a little bit of a shift with Canada, the United Kingdom, many other European countries, France, all recognizing Palestine as a state, although it's a more symbolic move as to whether there is, the required factors for statehood is a different matter entirely. But these countries recognizing Palestine as a state after so many years, quite a milestone. But has that really changed anything as far as the reality on the ground is concerned?
It has.
It
And
has.
that is why even the Palestinian Authority weren't allowed to come to New York. They were not given visas. Because that was going to be there's nothing to celebrate because there are so many deaths back home. But at the same time, it's a massive breakthrough for Palestine to have that recognition from these countries who for so long ceased to think that they existed even. They did not consider them. So from their point of view, this has been massive. But how many lives have been lost in that process? How much of blood has been shed for that realization to take place?
What really fueled that statement? Was it genuine political will, or was it just too much pressure from the general public?
Certainly, you've seen the protests that have taken place in major cities around the world. Australia is also a country that has joined that group now. So they understand that on the ground, people are wanting a certain thing, and you've got to listen to people. These are democracies. You listen to people and you act accordingly. But they're also frustrated with how the Israeli government is functioning. And there's only so much that they can do. They've tried to speak, they've put out statements. Now they're going to recognize Palestine. Something that other countries, including us, did a long time ago. The existence of Palestine. But this is where we begin to realize that when you really can't anymore, you decide to do something that is quite different. You change your strategy, you change your approach to the issue, and you recognize the other side because you can't control the ones that you're working with. And that's what it's come to. So on one side, yes, the people certainly are bringing about that change, but at the same time, governments are frustrated.
So it's also a strategic move on the part of the government, try and change things up, see what comes out of it.
So from the American point of view, the Americans were quite shocked. They didn't want this happening. They did not want this recognition. They were trying to stop it. But of course, it happened. Many countries have come out and spoken in favor of Palestine now, and it's a done deal. But of course, as you said, statehood requires certain conditions to be met. One of the basic conditions of land, territory, is today in question. So you have one of the most important things, which is international recognition. You can have the land, you can have the people, you can have the rules and regulations to govern. If you don't have international recognition, you don't exist. They have the international recognition.
They don't have the rest.
The people also are now being pushed out of their, obviously, regulations to govern are in disarray. Territory is also dwindling on a rapid basis. So there are several questions that come up now. You have the end goal, you don't have the earlier things that you have to achieve before you get to that final target.
So right after the Cold War between the United States and Russia, of course, United States came up on top. There was, for a certain period of time, a unipolar world. Then you see the growing influence of China. Now it's almost it is a multipolar world. So where do you see China, Russia, other big influential countries in the world featuring in this conflict? They have put out statements, they have taken certain steps, but not really recognized in the Western media. And being in Sri Lanka, we're more tilted towards that media because, of course, it's in English. Chinese media not really accessible to too many Sri Lankans, so it has not been featured as much. So where do you think their influence comes in, and how has that influence come in? Has it?
So two countries taking two different approaches. The Russians are anyway involved in Ukraine. They've got a lot on their plate already.
So they're not too
There's
concerned.
only so much that they can do as well. They're already running thin, and they have to be mindful of what is going on in their territory and how they are going to secure deals, progress, ceasefire, what are they going to do with Ukraine. China, on the other side, does not like to get involved in conflicts. Why? Because it's going to affect their trajectory. You get involved in a conflict, you have to have boots on the ground, you have to have resources devoted towards it. You need to change or stop your strategy for a moment in order to deal with this new situation. And China is on a trajectory. COVID came and messed plans up for a few years. It's already delayed now. They have certain goals, certain objectives where they want to be. Every year they have targets of what they want to achieve. They are issuing new initiatives. There's a global development initiative. There's a new AI initiative. They have a security initiative. They have targets of where they want to go. And these things distract. These things delay. They derail their plans. And that's not in their interest. But of course, you see the United States getting embroiled in all of these things, which China must be very happy about. You keep doing whatever you're doing, we're going on our trajectory. So at the end of it, they will work with all these countries, they will give assistance, they will give aid, they will support them in some way, they will support rebuilding initiatives if at some point we come to that. But they don't want to get involved in the conflict part of it, because that is violating one of their principles of not intervening in internal affairs of countries. So they don't want to come out too strongly.
Maintain that stance in Sri Lanka's conflict as well.
Exactly. They don't want to come and get involved in that. And they have a path, and they're on that path. Nothing should distract them from progressing on that path. So they will work with anyone, and you can see they're working with countries, they're reaching out to countries. They want to smoothen issues. If there are ruffles, they want to iron out any problems. They want a path because they have certain goals and objectives they set out to achieve.
So China's almost disassociation from geopolitical conflicts is not going to play out negatively in their influence on the world. Is that what you're saying?
They don't want to see any of their resources being devoted, any of their material being used, their personnel being used. But at the same time, they certainly want to be involved in the bigger picture of what is happening. Take, for example, what happened at the UNGA this year, a couple of weeks ago. The president didn't go. The premier was there, and they decided to talk about or mark the anniversary of the Global Development Initiative in New York with the premier. And they brought together presidents of countries, prime ministers of countries, ministers of foreign affairs. They had a large gathering there. But at the same time, the Chinese president was doing his own thing back in China. So we're getting involved. Now, many people thought with Donald Trump coming in and Donald Trump wanting to move away from multilateralism, etc., China is going to come and fill up that gap. China is not trying to sit in someone else's chair or fill someone else's shoes. They're doing their own thing on a larger scale. When China brought in certain banks that they brought in, they're not trying to compete with the World Bank, compete with the International Monetary Fund. They want to do something bigger and better in their own way, their own style. They've learned the nitty-gritty details of what goes on in these organizations. They want to do something bigger. So in order to mark presence, they came. Now, if you look at the main anniversaries, 2025, 2015, 2005, Chinese presidents have always been present except this year. Now, you would think they would go there. You would think they want their presence to be felt. Xi Jinping hasn't gone since 2015. Now, that is telling. They are involved in multilateralism, they are involved. They are putting a lot of emphasis on bilateral relations, country to country, but also multilateral, which they have initiated, like, for example, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which they want to give a lot of emphasis to and work with countries there. So, China certainly wants to see their presence increasing globally, but not through military intervention, conflict, violence. They want to be seen as the better alternative, the better ally to work with. They're trying to project this, the business ally, the trade ally. That's who they want to project themselves
as. A page from Singapore's success story.
Absolutely. They've learned from lots of countries, Shala. This is what, the Chinese, let's use the word copy, or they learn from. They don't do it identically, they do the same thing, but they do it in their own way after having realized what others are doing.
And fixing their mistakes.
So, as a result, they are on a winning wicket because they have got a strategy of what they want to achieve and where they want to go. Others, sometimes we don't learn our mistakes. We wallow in our sorrow and we feel sorry for ourselves and all those things. They're moving ahead. So, whilst all of this is happening in Egypt, lots of other things are happening in China. And China is moving ahead. China wants to be that engine of growth. They want to see that happening on the world stage. We sometimes are completely, as you said, when we look at the media, what are the channels we're looking at? We're looking at CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera. Why don't we watch CGTN? Why don't we watch Russia Today? Some might say, oh, they're biased. And the others are not. So what does that mean when we talk about media? Media has, I mean, you don't have the time or the luxury to sit and watch 5 channels and come to your own deduction. You'd have one channel that you watch for a news story. But if you watched all these stations, you would have different perspectives. The way they present the news, the way they talk about issues, the way they highlight matters, it varies. And if we follow only one, we're going to get one idea. And that's going to be our perspective then. This is where the diversity is so important, because what's happening on the world stage is not just one thing. There are so many things happening, and we are oblivious to lots of the other things, developments that are going on. We are fixated on one issue. When we look at a conflict, when we say, we're talking now about Gaza, is nothing happening in Ukraine? Is nothing happening anywhere else? Is that the only flashpoint in the world? The media tells us that's the flashpoint, so we look there. So
There's only so much attention to be given.
exactly. So, I mean, there's only so much that can be focused on as well. But if we dig deep, if we are following a story, we would want to know what is happening in A, B, C, D, all these destinations in the world. But we've got to want to do that. And as individuals, we don't
the
have
time,
the
money,
luxury of time
luxury.
exactly to just sit and do that only. So, whatever we see on the foreign component of the news, or whatever comes up on our news feeds,
Is what we believe.
Is what we believe.
So moving on, we see India also coming up in their influence across the world. We saw a brief conflict between India and Pakistan. India's influence in the conflict in the Middle East, of course, has been more in line with supporting Israel, well, of course, due to inherent biases. But do you see India getting involved in the Middle Eastern conflict a little bit more now that they had a small brief skirmish with Pakistan after the Pahalgam attacks?
So, that being said about India and Palestine, India gets along very well with countries like Saudi Arabia. Now, at that point, religion is not coming in the way, all those things are not coming in the way. So, this is where large powers come together, they overcome a lot. It's just that when the other country is a smaller country and they have other issues, those things come to the helm. But quite interestingly, if you look at the trajectory, India was at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization summit, but they were not at the military parade. So they were there on Sunday and Monday, but they left on Tuesday or Monday night because the Singaporean Prime Minister was coming to Delhi.
Okay.
And so the timing was perfect. You had to be out of China to go welcome the visitor who's coming home because you don't want to be a part of that military parade. So we're going to work together, but at the same time, we've got our differences too. We're maintaining that. We're returning to that. I'm not going to come for all your parties and support you in every way. There are certain things I will and certain things I will hold back on. So India is playing a very interesting game on the world stage. Countries want to work with India more than India wanting to work with them.
Okay.
They want to approach India. You have, for example, in December, the Russian president going on a visit to India. The dates have been discussed now, announced rather. And that's quite significant. Just a few months ago, we were told how the American administration was not happy with India. The oil
They slapped them with
purchases.
about 50% of tariffs.
So India's like, okay, fine, we have other options, we have other alternatives, other places we can go to. But does that mean the Americans are going to drop the Indians? No, they're not. They want to work with the Indians too. So this is where it's not a case of joining the American camp or joining the Russian camp. India's in their own camp. And that's where Jaishankar has made it quite clear, if you want, you join our camp. You come to where we are. Simple as that. And that's exactly what they're doing. They're walking the talk. If you look at the entire Modi premiership from the time he came into power 10, 11 years ago to now, he has had 2 foreign ministers, 2 external affairs ministers. And this is another lesson that you learn from countries like Russia. You bring in foreign ministers for the long term. Sergei Lavrov has been foreign minister for more than 2 decades now. He came in with President Putin at the very beginning, at the end of the Yeltsin period. Now, he has been there continuously. Now, what does that tell us? Jaishankar he's been there for a considerable period of time. Sushma Swaraj.
6-7 years, I believe.
Yes, Sushma Swaraj passed away. Of course, she was there for the first term, but then she's passed away. Jaishankar has been in the office now for a considerable period of time, 6 to 7 years. And as a result of that, he has established a network internationally. This has really helped him take on the world, go out there, promote India. And you can see India being very proactive now. It's not reactive. It's not waiting for others to point fingers. It's taking a very aggressive stance on the world stage. Sometimes you might think a bit too aggressive. Of course, that's their foreign policy and their strategy of how they want to be seen by the world. But they're really going out there, making representations, making sure that they're heard, they're in the room, they're known, they're not ignored. They're not a developing country in Asia. They're not a regional player anymore. They're now a global player. They're not a country that is important in South Asia. They're a country that's important on the world stage. They're at that table now. They're not just at our table. That really shows a lot, irrespective of domestic policies and what is happening inside India, etc. We have seen this in the Modi premiership. He has really been able to take that country to that global table where just a few of them sit down and he's at that table now.
So, Dr. Cooke, we've been talking about all the various countries in different parts of the world and how their influence is playing out in the crisis in the Middle East. We finally come towards the big countries in the Middle East. What has their contribution been like? Why isn't there an urgency to sort things out in the Middle East, to bring peace in the Middle East? Of course, we've all known that the Middle East has been a severely conflict-ridden region, given the massive resources available in the Middle East and everybody's interest of having a foothold in the Middle East. United States, Europe, Russia and China have been having their own issues, so they've not really been getting an opportunity to get their hands in there. But everybody seems to be interested in the Middle East, and that seems to be part of the problem why there are so many crises in the Middle East. But what are the bigger countries in the Middle East doing to kind of sort things out, bring some sort of peace, or do they also thrive on this crisis, or maybe have gotten used to it and use it to their advantage?
Have they gotten used to it, or have they gotten used to not interfering in it or not getting involved in it because they don't want that to hamper their progress?
Okay.
When we talk about people getting displaced, people coming out, are they flocking into these neighboring countries? They're not.
They're not being allowed.
They're not being allowed in.
Okay.
They're not being taken there. They're not going into those countries. They're going further afield. Now, what does that tell you about the neighboring region? How come the neighboring region is not coming forward? I know there are divisions, Sunni, Shia, there are divisions that exist in that part of the world. So we must understand West Asia is very complex. It's not just a set of Muslim countries. There's complexity, there's depth in issues, problems, concerns, history, wars, borders. There have been several of them over the years. Now, as a result of that, these countries, we sometimes question as to why they're not doing more. But they don't want to be perceived in that. If you look at Egypt, where they're having the discussions, Egypt is very much a North African country getting involved in a West Asian issue. Yes, they're all falling into that one area. I mean, even the term you use, the Middle East,
it's not really the Middle East.
Not quite the middle of the East from any stretch of the imagination, unless you were seated in London and looking out into this part of the world, when if China was the Far East, this was in the middle. But for example, where we sit in Colombo, if that's the Middle East, we are the Far East, China is very far in the East or lost in the East. So this is where that terminology has been maintained. There's been dominance of that region by certain countries. These are countries that if you go back to the late 40s, early 50s, Shalan, you will find, now we heard about a plane that was given to the American president. We heard about that from Qatar. We heard about that. But if you go back to the early 50s, the Americans gave the Saudi king a plane. It happened the other way around, right? So that is where relations have been cultivated. There were prospects, there were things they were finding, the opportunities that were lying in this region. This region was going to grow in value, in resources. That was coming. It hadn't come, it was coming. And as a result of that, these countries have very strategic relations with countries like the United States of America. If you remember when President Trump went on a visit to Saudi Arabia, who did the Crown Prince bring for that meeting? The new Syrian leader. The Syrian leader has not come through an election. There's been a grab of power. He's now the leader. Okay, we accept that. We move on. But when you have him meeting with the American president, what does that say for him? He's now a legitimate leader. The American president is not meeting
a terrorist.
A terrorist.
Despite the fact that he was on the list of terrorists.
But you can't say that now. Now you've got to change all of that. You've got to change the terminology. He's not a terrorist anymore. He is the leader of that country, and the American president is meeting, means you've got to, there's credibility. So more than America getting something out of this, America is giving other countries something out of this. This happened with North Korea too. For a long time, people would say, if you wanted an example of a failed state, look at North Korea. You can't do that anymore. North Korea can't be held up as an example of a failed state simply because their leader has met with the American leader. And that's where we hold America. America playing a very big role on the world stage. But look at how America is working with countries in this region. They've given assurances now to these countries saying, we will guarantee, we will not allow things to happen to you. They did that with Qatar as well.
But that didn't really pan out, did it?
It didn't. So now, but of course they say, if there won't be any more attacks. So let's hope the Israeli leader also gets that memo. There shouldn't be more attacks. Nothing should happen because that's jeopardizing America's relations with these countries. But there's a lot of backdoor diplomacy that is taking place that we're not seeing in the public domain. These countries are working with each other, talking to each other, engaging with each other. There are security interests in these countries. Going back to the first Gulf War, why did the Americans come to the defense of Kuwait? Small country being invaded. It's a matter of principle? I think not. Right? There was a lot more to it there. And this is where, so just around a few years later, we saw what happened in certain other countries in Africa, Rwanda, for example. There was no intervention. So many died. Hutus and the Tutsis were killing each other. There was no intervention. That did not work there. So that is where there is a lot of connectivity, country to country, capital to capital, leader to leader. And as a result of that, these countries are taking a back seat. They are involved in negotiations. They are involved in peace talks. They don't want instability. They are sitting on oil wells, etc. Attacks can blow up their countries. It's very volatile. They have to think of the safety factor more than anything. Right? Not only people getting displaced, those fires can burn for years if some of those oil wells are bombed. And that is where they have to be very conscious of that. It's not like they're in love with Israel, but they realize they have to work with Israel because Israel's in the neighborhood. Israel is working with the United States of America. The United States of America is working with them. So they're not coming out too strong, too hard. In some cases, we are seeing there will also those countries, they will give assistance of some kind, but not substantial. We're not seeing massive donations, massive efforts being conducted by them. Why is that? Why are they not doing that? So there are too many questions about that region and countries in that region. Have they done enough by the Palestinians? And sometimes you might wonder they haven't.
I've also been seeing certain reports indicating that Qatar might consider going towards several other countries, maybe China or Russia, for certain assurances, even as far as their security is concerned, because the Patriot missile system that is in Qatar didn't really intercept the missiles that came from Israel. And there is this school of thought that says, well, Israel used US rockets. And in which world would you expect a US Patriot defense system to take out their own rockets? So there is, like you mentioned, that question of credibility now that this attack has happened and they've come forward and said, well, we ensure that none of these attacks will happen in the future. Is there a shift in that aspect? Is the conduct of, countries supported by the United States in the Middle East grave enough for these countries in the Middle East, or the larger countries in the Middle East that have been relying on their friendship with the United States for so long, for their prosperity, to try and move elsewhere?
Possibly not. If you just look at the Trump presidency and his relationship with these countries, we talked about Qatar, we talked about the plane. Look at his first presidency. When he came in, what was the rhetoric? He said he was going to ban people coming from these Muslim countries. That is how he identified them, and he gave a list of countries. And he said he's not going to do that. But where did he go on his first visit? To Saudi Arabia. Now, isn't that a country that is predominantly Islamic? It is. Did he not know that? Of course he does. So then it's okay to go to that country. You see, that country is not being viewed through that same lens. That's an ally. That's how they're working with them. Now, the Saudis know that. The Saudis have a very good friend on that side of the Atlantic Ocean. They're not going to jeopardize those things for other countries. So under the Trump presidency especially, he has very close collaboration. The last time he was in the region, he met with the leaders. They had a conclave. They assured him their support. He assured them their support. It was a slapping on the back kind of thing. We're with you, you're with us, etc. Would they want to jeopardize that with the United States of America, given the capacity of the United States still? Maybe in the future things might change, but at the moment, that's not the way it is. And as a result, they want to work with the country that has the power. We're going back to power. The Russians can't leave that situation and come away now. They're too preoccupied with what is going on in their region. They've lost a lot, they're gaining. That's another whole area that's going on over there. The Chinese are not going to come out suddenly and start fighting in that region. Obviously, your best bet is on the Americans then. Are you going to leave them and go to another power base that is not as powerful as the Americans? I don't think so.
It goes back to the old concept of the known devil is better than the unknown angel.
Absolutely. You don't want to cut your bridges or burn your bridges with countries that you've been working with all this time. Because you feel, irrespective of the rhetoric, irrespective of what might be happening in that country, irrespective of their relationship with Israel, they're still with you. They're still working with you. You don't want to earn their wrath. And they certainly don't want to do anything to jeopardize relations with America.
Also, one region in the world that we've really not touched on is the African region and their response to what's happening in the Middle East. And like you quite rightly pointed out, they're a little bit closer than we are, and than many of the other countries that are really involved in this entire conflict or influencing this entire conflict a lot. How do you see their reaction to this entire thing? Because, of course, this kind of violence is not something new to Africa. South Africa, there was apartheid, so on and so forth. So this touches home base a little closer in Africa. What has their response been like? Because, again, you don't see Western media reporting on this at all, almost.
We're clueless as to what is happening in Africa, on the African continent, unless, of course, you watch BBC's Africa Report and you try to understand different developments inside those countries. But those might be based on culture or business or entrepreneurship or tech advancement, etc. But the political relations amongst countries, what is going on there right now, we are not exposed to that. But we also got to understand those countries are facing a totally different scenario. There's corruption, there's lack of resources, there's lack of prioritizing correct resources for correct requirements within those countries. They are facing their own list of problems, which is just only growing. We might think they're many years after colonialism. Have they now risen? Have they moved on? No. There's another layer that has come that is controlling resources. So there are people who might have private jets in the country, people who have nothing to eat in that country, in the same country. So this is where the gap has widened even further, I think, than even the colonial period. And this is continuing to happen. Now, as a result of that, do you think that they are really focused on what is happening outside the continent? They are focused on a lot of problems that they're facing within. And countries like China know that, and they're coming in, they're getting involved, they're giving them things under obligation, they're getting their support. There's a whole different narrative that is unfolding there, which is not in the mainstream media. It is not being discussed out there. They say that there are people who are in huts almost, but they've got a satellite outside, which is beaming a Chinese channel. And they've got a large screen television inside their hut. So, this calls into question priorities. Is it making Africa a capitalist continent in terms of just having the material resources? Or are you trying to improve the livelihoods of people and try to change the scenario over there? African countries have lost a lot of American funding. They're very upset about that. People are suffering, people are dying. How much is being talked about that? When USAID shut down, when USAID was stopped, I mean, you would have seen on social media, people talked about projects that they had on the ground in African countries. And these are not just projects based on democracy building or discussions on democratic principles. Some of these were health programs which were giving people medicine, giving them treatment for HIV, giving polio, giving this medicine to people. That has stopped. So who's going to give it to them? No one is. Are we talking about how many are dying as a result of that? There's no attention on that. So this is where within the African continent, amidst all those countries with all their differences, and it's a very diverse continent, we sit very close to it, but we see it as one monolithic group, and it is not. It's a very diverse continent, which is having a lot of problems country to country, within countries, but nobody's talking about the problems that they are facing. So their emphasis, their focus on what is happening in this region of the world, despite the fact that it's just above them on the planet, there isn't much attention there.
There isn't much drive from the people because they have their own issues. Leaders are not concerned too much either.
You're not seeing massive protests breaking out. You've seen protests in other parts of the world, in Europe, for example, in the United States, people waving Palestinian flags, going on boats, doing all those things. These people are starving, they're facing malnutrition, they're facing a loss of medical care, food. Those are pressing problems. So it's one thing to champion causes and fight for people and talk about things, but that's very short-lived. You've got to go home and eat something. You've got to have a home to go home to. You've got to have medicine to take to not get sick on a daily basis. And people are being deprived of that. No one's talking about that. We've completely, that is not being discussed widely in the United States. That's not coming on mainstream media.
It's not a global prioritized issue.
No. That's something, it was an internal decision inside the United States. People lost their jobs in Sri Lanka. I mean, it's not an internal issue. It's a global issue. That's how strong that country is, and that's how strong that country's influence is in the world. They have reached out far and wide. And as a result of that, anything that happens in there is going to have an impact everywhere in the world. And it's having a huge impact, especially in the African continent, which we are not talking about enough.
Dr. Cooke, just since we're in the final few minutes of the show, how has Sri Lanka's response been to the tragedy in the Middle East, the conflict in the Middle East? We haven't been overly involved, and there is no possible scenario that we can see ourselves having some real influence in that region. But of course, it's important that we are part of the global conversation. How have we fared in that department?
So we have been a part of it. We had the UNGA sessions, you had the president speaking at that point, the president talking about Palestine, talking about the Palestinian people, talking about the suffering, talking about the fact that these things have to end. But we are a developing country. What more are we going to do? Many people we hear saying, you need to identify Israel, you need to condemn Israel, talk about Israel. We have lots of Sri Lankans working in Israel. Israel is their second home. They are earning, they are sending money back home. So then the argument is, oh, so it's all about the money. We're not bothered about the people who are dying in Gaza. You see, we are not high up there on the pedestal in terms of power, on the power ladder. We're not high up there on the economic ladder. We've got to accept reality. We've got to be pragmatic here. You know, realism is part and parcel of global politics, and sometimes we like to be very idealistic. We're looking at situations as though they are black and white, and they are not. It's very grey. We talk about concerns with regard to Israel, and yes, there are lots of problems there. Let us not forget what Hamas is. Let us not forget that the Palestinian Authority should be the group that we are talking to and talking about now. We don't talk about them. We started talking about the Palestinian Authority only when it came to the UNGA sessions and they were denied visas. Until then, we hadn't heard of where he was, where Mahmoud Abbas was. We didn't know what was happening inside there. That is not in the media either. So, I mean, we're talking about Hamas and Israel having discussions. Now, Palestinian Authority should be playing a bigger role in there. So, there are other issues that we have to consider there. So, from our point of view, we are a small country. You will see on a Friday afternoon, people will go and gather in certain parts of Colombo and have a protest, a small group. That started a couple of years ago when this problem started. Is that group continue to do that? Do we see that sustained? There are other issues happening in the world. We're focusing on other problems elsewhere. Sorry.
So but does that mean that they shouldn't do it at all?
No, they should do it. They should do it, but it has to be sustained. But we've also got to be pragmatic. We've got to think of what is practical. We have thousands who are employed in Israel at the moment. Everything is not about the money, but the money comes into the economy. This is a country that faces an economic crisis. Let us not forget that. Then in that case, we'll bring all our Sri Lankans back from Israel, and then we'll try to take the high ground. But let's not forget who Israel's friends are in the world. Do you want to have your garments going to the United States of America? Do you want the tariff reduced, or do you want the tariff raised? You know, there are so many interconnected problems which we don't see. What's happening to the Palestinian people is terrible. There's no doubt about it. But we've also got to understand this country fell into a terrible abyss as well. It has been so difficult to come to where we are right now. Do we want to go back into that? You see, when it comes to dealing with the United States, our main strategy is to talk to the Americans and try to reduce the tariff. What is our plan B? Are we looking at other markets? Are we looking elsewhere? We're not doing that either. Are we expanding into other markets? Are we looking for new territory? Are we looking for new products? Lot of gaps there. So, you see, you want to work with the Americans. You don't like the Israelis. You want to support the Palestinians, whereas those countries in that region are working very well with the Americans. They're tolerating the Israelis. They're working to some extent with the Palestinians. Let's take a leaf out of their book. I mean, we get all tangled up here in Colombo and start shouting and screaming what's happening over there. Those countries are not. Those countries are being very pragmatic. That's what we need. When countries are being led, when countries are engaging in foreign policy, you have to be very pragmatic as to what you're doing. There's a rationale for everything.
And very realistic.
Very realistic. You can't otherwise. Let us go back to the early 80s, if I may, when the Falklands issue came up. Argentina is a country that moved a resolution in the late 40s to support us to gain admission into the UN when we were being vetoed. But when it came to Falklands, we voted with the British. Now, shouldn't we stand with Argentina? Yes, we should. But what was the underlying problem there? If we stood with Argentina, there was something massive that was going to be jeopardized here. And that was the Victoria Dam. So, of course, the president at the time had a ground to stand on. He said aggression is wrong. What Argentina did with the Falklands was wrong. So he had a point to stand on. What was the reality? If he voted with Argentina, Britain would have said, get the rest of the money from Argentina and build your dam. The dam would have been half built. Right? So you've got to be realistic. Now, people who are benefiting from the dam and the reservoir and all those things don't talk about the principles that we violated at that point. You know, so you've got to be realistic. It's good to have ideas and things that should be done. But this is a very different world that we're living in. It's not a world that is driven by fairness a lot. It's a world that's driven by power. We don't have that power on the world stage. India does. We don't.
Thank you very much, Dr. George Cooke, for that very insightful conversation. We touched on many areas, although our focus was only going to be the Middle East. We traveled quite across the world. Thank you very much for all of your insightful views on the matter. Thank you very much to all our viewers out there for tuning in to another episode of Face to Face. Until we meet again, take care and God bless.
Newsfirst.